So I actually got fully admitted to the hospital, and in a 3-day span had the wonderful privilege of being able to do a back-to-back on 2 separate days, endoscopy and colonoscopy. Now, because I had the symptoms though that could be correlated with something like H. pylori, in that case, they did tell me that they did a biopsy, tested for H. pylori, or looked for H. pylori rather, and did not find it. Now, 3 months later, I did a GI map, and H. pylori with virulence factors came up on that. During those 3 months, I wasn't like kissing anyone or dating anyone at the time. I lived with my buddy. I had a very boring, stable life. I lived with my buddy, and that buddy is someone I've known since 3rd grade. And I'd lived with him for the last year and a half. There is a very improbable chance that I somehow picked up that infection randomly in a 3-month span. And remember, this is a guy who had stomach pain his whole life, cystic acne, ulcer history, like a bunch of other things that would correlate with H. pylori. Or I had it beforehand. So this isn't even poking at Western medicine, but like just to show the power of this technology, how the heck, assuming I had it at the time, how the heck could a biopsy miss something like that? And yet this DNA testing is that good that it could find it. Is it actually common for biopsies to miss H. pylori?
It is, unfortunately. And that's where, if you look in the medical literature, they say there is no gold standard test for H. pylori because it's in the stomach. It's really hard to get down there and get it or go up and get it. You just it's stuck in between. And the problem is that H. pylori colonization is very patchy. So you could have one really nasty patch that's an ulcer, and yet the rest of the stomach may be not too bad. Or again, you have these little patches, really bad inflamed gastritis patches. But if they're taking a sample, they have to consider they're taking a sample the size of a pencil eraser. And H. pylori, while it's often in the body, the main part of the stomach, it could be the upper stomach, it could be the lower stomach. They're only taking maybe a couple samples. So they have to hit the right spot. And so if they don't hit the right spot, it's going to come up as negative. And there's a lot of complicating factors too. They don't always tell people either. If you're in a PPI, that could interfere with the test results. If you have bleeding, when we're looking like there's urea breath tests, there's endoscopy with biopsy, if the stomach is actually bleeding, if someone's on a PPI, if they're on Bismuth, that can actually affect the accuracy of these tests. And the problem is a lot of these people, they have heartburn, so they're on a PPI before they get the test done. So are we getting a false negative because the PPI is interfering or the bleeding's interfering? Again, that's the beauty of the qPCR technology is there's less interference factors when we're looking directly for that DNA.
That was a profound experience for me at the time because I know I can't prove it. I would bet everything in my life. I'd bet my life actually that I had H. pylori at the time and it just didn't show up. And that's where you truly get humbled by the complications of the mixed systems that patients and clients are in right now. Because you know what? I think about those doctors and people that were doing those procedures on me. They did mean that and they meant well and they weren't lying. Some people get into this space and then they have such a resentment for Western medicine. I don't share that anymore. I haven't shared that in years. And I know that you certainly don't either. This is so much more complicated than that. Those people believed wholeheartedly what they were saying. And yet I run the right tests that they would never even think to run. And it's, whoa, this was a huge part of my healing journey that I needed. I did actually address H. pylori quite well, thankfully. I know that for a fact. So it was more the parasites that I didn't address as well. I would have walked around if I didn't have access to the stuff at FDN and the knowledge of FDN too, not even just access to the tests, thinking, oh, what was that H. pylori thing? I Google that. Oh, okay. I guess I don't have it. Western medicine told me I don't have it. And they don't even tell me that it could be a false negative, right? So it's just really crazy and humbling when you realize how complicated this stuff gets. And the best we can do is just keep sharing information like this. So it's super easy to talk to you. We're already at 6-7 minutes left. It's not a hard stop by any means. I just want to wrap up with a few really important questions. Of course, we'll talk about soon where people can find you. But before that, I wanted to word this question correctly because normally I word it as like a client testimonial. It could be a client testimonial, but I know yourself and of course FDN's out there. We don't just look at stool testing, even though it's very important. We look at a set of tests with every client. However, I would like to know if there's any cases that you can think of off the top of your head to the degree that you're able to share, of course. The client or person whose test results you got back by finding the stuff on the stool test, it like totally changed their life and their healing journey. So what I mean is, even if they ran a series of 5 or 10 labs, it's because they ran the GI map stool test and found stuff on there. That was their main healing opportunity or some of their main root causes. So are there any people that you could think of in your head that just have an incredible story where we identified stuff on the GI map, we addressed it, and we restored their health or at least significantly improved it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but one just really cool story that was actually another one of the medical education clinicians on the team at Diagnostic Solutions Lab. They had this case, but they were consulting on it. And so the clinician is the one consulting with us. They ran the GI map on their patient and they found the really high level of occult blood and calprotectin. If we're finding things like that, that's a serious issue. So we're generally referring out to a gastroenterologist for further testing. And that's what this clinician did. They referred out their patient. Patient went to the gastroenterologist. They did an endoscopy. So they went down and took a look in the stomach. And then they went up and did a colonoscopy and checked out the colon. And they said, I don't know, this test must be wrong. I don't see anything. Everything looks fine to me. So they sent him back to this clinician. So this clinician runs another GI map, even more blood, even more inflammation. And so they're calling us and going, the client is going to their gastro and they're saying, it's like, we're essentially nuts because they don't see anything. They've done all their standard tests. And yet we're going, this test is getting worse and worse. This is not looking good. This gut is so massively inflamed and it's bleeding really terribly. And so then the patient goes back to their gastro and they said, you need to do something different. I believe this test, there is something major wrong with me. And of course, they had symptoms too, severe symptoms. You need to do something else. There is something wrong with me. And they said, we scoped you both ways. What we could do is a capsule endoscopy. You're going to swallow a capsule because an endoscopy, if you're going down, of course, the throat, you can't really get into the small intestine very well. It stops at the stomach, maybe very upper
Okay.
part of the small intestine. And then, of course, your colonoscopy, you're coming up from the bottom, you're getting more of the colon. Again, your small intestine is like your missing piece. So you swallow this capsule, it's going to read everything all the way down. So they did the capsule endoscopy. They found Crohn's disease. The patient had IBD. The GI maps, if it wasn't for this clinician calling us up and saying, how do you explain this? And just the patient themselves being their own health advocate, going back to their gastro and saying, I believe this test, something is wrong. I'm so sick. This test is showing how I feel.
Mhm.
Do more testing. There's something wrong. You got to find it. And they found it. And that just changed their life because
Yeah.
Crohn's, we're obviously going to approach Crohn's very differently. So they were able to get on the proper treatment for Crohn's and it's changed their life.
Okay, you did not underdeliver with that. I figured I'd get a cool story. Just so you know, your guys' results may vary a little bit if you're doing enough GI maps, but yeah, that's literally life changing. And I could spend a whole nother hour, I won't, but talking about how it's one thing if it's presenting on the test.